the witness stand, Doctor. Okay, welcome back. The jurors brought in. You're still under oath. Good.
No, thank you for asking.
Everybody's here who should be. Bring in the jury, please. Thank you. Please be seated, everyone. Welcome back to the courtroom, members of the jury. We have the witness back on the witness stand, remain under oath. So let's.
I'm done with the witness. Before I sat down, I wanted to move into evidence what's been previously marked as Romeo. It's a death certificate.
Is there any objection?
No.
All right. Admit number 17 for the state. All right. So now cross-examination.
Forgot to say good afternoon when I came in. I was such a rush. Good, welcome back. Dr. Sackbauer, I'm going to make this real quick, real painless, I think. I would hope. Now, in your report, you stated that the knife is consistent with the wounds and it is most likely what killed Matthew Bonnett, correct?
Consistent with.
Consistent with it. Okay, so not exactly, it's not 100% sure, but it is consistent, correct?
Correct.
Okay, good. Same thing with the was it the injury on the bridge of the nose?
Yes, correct.
And now you said you do DNA spot cards. We did a depo with you, I believe, and I was reading something about your DNA spot cards. Could you please explain what that is?
Oh, absolutely. So we do in this office, we do a DNA spot card on all of the autopsies or even external examinations we do. We obtain blood from the decedent and we make what we call a spot card. These are just little cards. They have little circles. You've probably seen them on Hollywood. We do actually use professional spot cards, which means we purchase ones. The paper is impregnated with certain substances to help stabilize the DNA for testing, and then we make them and we retain them. The majority of those spot cards never actually get tested. They're just retained in the file.
Okay, so they're retained by the medical examiner's
By
office?
my office.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And again, when I was reading our deposition of you, you were made aware of the DNA results. Is that correct?
To be honest, I don't recollect.
I would imagine not. It was quite a while ago. Now, without going into the DNA results, one of the other things I happened to notice in our deposition of you, if two different blood types, two different samples of blood are found on the same blade, what is that indicative of?
If two
different
blood
separate
types.
Samples, yeah, two different.
Not two different DNA patterns, just two different blood types.
Yeah, two different, I guess, even two different DNA patterns. If you find multiple sets of blood, I guess, on the same blade, it would be the better way. I'm a layman, so you gotta excuse my lack of medical knowledge here. But if you found two different types of blood on the blade, what would that be indicative of?
It would indicate that there were two contributors.
Two contributors.
Two people.
Okay, and which would mean that blade was probably used on both people, correct?
It would just mean that substance containing two people's DNA was on the knife or whatever object was
Right.
tested. It wouldn't necessarily mean that it was used on two people, because of course you cast DNA simply from your palm, but of course it could have been used on two people too. I don't know.
Right. I think I understand what you're saying here.
I'm
that-
sorry, Mr. Tucker, would you mind moving the
Yes,
podium
I
here
sure
a little
can.
bit? Because
I sure
I'm
can.
having
I'm
a
sorry.
hard time seeing the state's table, and I do need to be able to see everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, it wouldn't be 100% conclusive is what you're trying to say, I think.
Well, I wouldn't say that. The fact that you would get a profile, and I would leave that to an expert in DNA to talk about the likelihood that a given DNA profile belongs to a given individual. Statistically, I would definitely leave that alone. But I wouldn't say that having a profile on a weapon means that that person had to be involved in using the weapon or not using the weapon. I wouldn't testify that. I would simply state that if I was made aware of it, that their profile was found on the weapon.
Okay.
I don't know if that
I
answers
think
the
you
question.
I think, again, layman here, I think you were talking about DNA transfer from other things too, it's possibility or, that kind of thing.
Judge, I'm going to object. The question is.
Oh, yeah, let me try and rephrase. Like I said, I'm trying to key in on medical terms that I'm not exactly familiar with. Okay. Again, we're going back to the DNA or the blood of different people being found on the object, whatever the object would be. Would that be consistent with that object being, again, coming into contact with both of those people?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, I think that's a better way. I should have said it. Now, again, that would mean it most likely would be contact, though, not secondary contact, like we were just like I was just trying to describe. Secondary, like, okay.
I definitely wouldn't testify. It's okay. I wouldn't testify to that.
Right.
The likelihood, I would definitely defer to an expert in
DNA.
DNA.
Okay,
Absolutely.
good. Okay, and but you didn't test the knife, correct?
I did not, no.
Okay. And again, I think let me check here, because I don't think there's too much else we need to go into. Now, just to clarify, when we were discussing all the wound patterns and the paths that you were talking about, now that doesn't say, again, it doesn't tell you much about the assailant, does it? The type of assailant.
No, not at all.
Okay, so it can't tell you how big, how tall, how, whether the right or left-handed, any of that.
No, it cannot.
Okay. So it doesn't tell you much about the assailant other than this is consistent, this weapon is consistent with the wounds.
Correct.
Okay. All right, and let's see. Oh, and I don't think you'll remember this. I don't know if you would remember during the deposition, I don't know if you saw the other victim in the case, Miss Paula Belmont. They showed you laceration, they showed you a neck wound.
Well, I'll listen to the question, but
Oh. Let me try and get to a question that's a little bit quicker and easier here. Were you shown pictures of the victim, the other victim, Paula Belmont, when you were doing
I don't
the depo?
recollect.
I had a feeling it was a long time ago. Okay, and I'll tell you, there's not much else I think we need to go in with you. Doctor, thank you for your time. I think we've addressed everything that we need to, so we can be excused.
all right.
I'm done with my cross.
All right, thank you. Is there any redirect?
Yes, Dr. Stephauer, the knife that I showed you, the one with the red and black handle, the one that's in evidence.
Yes,
Is that consistent with having inflicted the wounds in Matthew Bonnett's back?
it is.
Now, that knife has a serrated side and a straight edge or a smooth side, right?
A sharp edge and a serrated edge, yes.
Sharp edge on one side, serrated edge on the other. And is that reflected in the wounds that you see in his back?
Yes,
So I guess one side of that wound has a serrated pattern and the other side has a smooth cut?
Well, the real primary thing is that you have a single sharp edge. Serrated wounds, serrated weapons can make specific patterned wounds. These wounds did not have a specific pattern that is directly associated with the serrated edge, just with not having two sharp edges.
Okay, so ultimately, though, that knife that is in evidence, you said, is consistent with having inflicted the wounds in Matthew Bonnett.
It is.
Okay. I don't have anything else for you, Dr. Stuckmeyer. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
All right, then. Thank you, sir. You can step down and be excused.
Thank you, Your Honor.
You have all the exhibits here. Stay prepared to call their next witness.
Yes, Your Honor. State, we call Angel Ozlowski.
Maybe sidebar for just a second, Your Honor.
Excuse me?
Maybe sidebar for just a second.
Okay. Will you please come forward, ma'am? Could you approach the deputy there? Stop, face the clerk, raise your right hand.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you will give in the cause now in hearing shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? I do.
Please have a seat on the witness stand. Speak loudly and clearly.
Permission to proceed, Your Honor.
Yes.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Please state your name and spell your last name for the record.
Angela Ozlowski, Oslowski.
And where are you currently employed, ma'am?
With the Florida Department of Law Enforcement in the Fort Myers Regional Operations Center.
How long have you been so employed in that capacity?
Since January of 2016.
Okay, and what is your position with the Florida Department of Law Enforcement?
I'm a crime laboratory analyst in the biology section.
Okay, would you please be so kind to explain for the jury your educational background?
So I have a Bachelor's of Science in Biochemistry Forensic Science from Suffolk University in Boston, Massachusetts. And I have a Master's of Science in Forensic DNA and Serology from the University of Florida.
What are your duties as a crime laboratory analyst in the biology section of Florida Department of Law Enforcement?
So as a crime laboratory analyst in the biology section, I analyze items of evidence for the possible presence of biological material, collect samples for DNA analysis, interpret my results, write reports, and testify in court as needed.
What, if any, specialized training do you have for your position as a crime laboratory analyst?
So with the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, I underwent a two-part training program in which first I learned about the serological processes or the testing for biological material. I took written, oral, and practical examinations and then did supervised casework under a qualified analyst. And then the second part of my training was for the DNA analysis process. And I also did written, oral, and practical examinations, and then the supervised casework under a qualified analyst for that portion as well.
Okay, and as a crime laboratory analyst for FDLE, do you have an occasion to perform DNA testing?
Yes, I do.
And approximately how many times have you performed DNA testing in your career as an analyst for FTLE?
I would say it's at least been over 5,000 samples.
Okay. Over 5,000 samples?
Yes.
And how long have you been performing DNA testing?
So since November of 2017, when I completed my training.
In addition to your background training, do you undergo any proficiency testing?
Yes, I do.
Please explain to the jury what type of proficiency testing you undergo.
So twice a year, I will get samples from an outside laboratory in which they know what results are expected from the samples that I'll be working. I work them as if they're regular casework samples. I'll obtain results and report my results to them, and this will test my ability to do my job as well as the DNA analysis system.
Have you ever been qualified as an expert in DNA testing?
Yes, through the Florida Department of Law Enforcement.
And have you previously testified in court as an expert in DNA testing?
Yes, I have.
Approximately how many times?
Approximately 25 times.
Judge, at this time, I would ask the court to recognize Ms. Oslowski as an expert in the area of DNA testing and analysis.
Any objection? No, Your Honor. Recognize the witness in that area of expertise.
Thank you, Your Honor. Ms. Oslowski, please explain in layman's terms as best as you can, what is DNA?
So DNA stands for deoxyribonucleic acid. It's the basic building block of all human beings. You get half of your DNA from your mother and half of your DNA from your father, and it's essentially what gives you your height, eye color, hair color, things of that nature. Greater than 99% of your DNA will be the same among each person, and less than 1% is what varies among each person, other than identical twins, which will have the exact same DNA types.
Were you asked to perform DNA testing in this case?
Yes, I was.
Please explain for the jury what type of, or what method of DNA testing you utilized in this case.
So I test for something called short tandem repeats, which are actually short segments of DNA that each person has, but what varies is how often these short segments repeat. So for example, since I get one type from my mother and one type from my father, at one location I might have 11 repeats and 12 repeats, and then another person might have 9 and 10. And I actually test 21 of these different locations.
Okay, and what method of DNA, what are the steps used in short tandem repeat DNA analysis?
So there are 4 steps. So first, I will either collect a sample from an item of evidence or take a cutting from an item of evidence, and this will get heat and chemicals, and this helps break open the cells so I have access to the DNA within it, and it also helps clean up the sample. Next, the sample will go through something called quantitation, in which we'll see how much DNA is actually present already in the sample. Then the sample will go through something called amplification, in which those 21 short tandem repeat locations will be amplified millions of times. And this way, during capillary electrophoresis, which is essentially a part of the process that separates the DNA out by size, so that way I can then look at it on a graphical type of form so I can interpret the DNA results.
Thank you. And as an analyst, what procedures do you take to assure the quality of the testing?
So when looking at items of evidence, I ensure that I use a face mask, hairnet, lab coat, disposable gloves, and then every area and utensils are cleaned with something called Cavicide that will remove DNA. And then during each step of the process, something called controls are used to ensure that each step of the process is working correctly.
Please explain for the members of the jury, what are controls?
So controls there'll usually be a positive and a negative control. So a positive control will contain something that I'm expecting to get a result from, and it'll get say the chemicals or whatever part of the process that I'm utilizing, and it'll get all of those elements. And I'll expect to get a result from that, and that shows that everything or all the reagents in that step of the process was working correctly. And then the negative control will still get all the reagents, but nothing else in it. So that way I would expect to just still get absolutely no results obtained for that, just to show that nothing extra was added in at any point.
Is the laboratory where you conduct your testing at, is it accredited?
Yes, it is.
Okay, from who?
From the American National Standards Institute of National Accreditation Board.
And for the jury's knowledge, what does that mean?
So that means that my laboratory is following a set of certain high standards that are set forth in the forensic and scientific community.
Once you finish your DNA analysis process, what types of result can you obtain from your procedures?
So after doing that 4-step process, I can get something called a single source profile, in which I have DNA at all 21 locations, where I would say it's a complete single source profile. So that indicates that I got information at all 21 of those locations, and it's indicative of one individual. I can also get a mixed DNA profile, in which I have DNA results that indicate there's more than one individual that's present. I can also get DNA results that are too limited to interpret, which means that I had some information that was obtained, but because of its limited nature, it's not enough to say how many individuals are present and to do any comparisons to. I can also get DNA results that are too complex, in which there are more than 4 donors present, and therefore I really truly can't say how many individuals are in the sample, and therefore I cannot interpret that as well. And then I can also sometimes get a mixed DNA profile, but there's one clear high donor, and the information for the additional contributor is very limited. And so I can call that profile, I'll say it's a major DNA profile that was obtained. And I can do comparisons to that high profile that's present.
Okay, and what are your results used for?
So the results from the evidence samples are used to then compare to standards or known samples of DNA collected from individuals.
Explain for the jury what are standards.
So a standard is usually collected as a buccal swab, which is a swab directly from an individual's inside cheek or buccal cells, or it can also be blood stain card or blood. And this is to represent, so it'll go through that 4-step of the DNA analysis process in order to get a DNA profile to represent that person's DNA.
Okay, and did you receive standards in this case?
Yes, I did.
Would you please explain or tell the jury what standards you utilized in this case?
Is it okay if I refer to my notes just for
Yes,
the
if it'll refresh your
names?
recollection, Your Honor.
So I obtained buccal swabs from Franklin Tucker, buccal swabs from Rory Wilson, excuse me, buccal swabs from John Johnson. I also obtained a blood stain card from a Matthew Bonnett, as well as buccal swabs from a Paula Belmonte. And then I believe I also got buccal swabs represented as being from a Roger Raggett.
And did you do the testing and compare those buccal swabs compared with other items of evidence that you were requested to do so in this case?
Yes, so for each of those samples, it went through that 4-step of the DNA analysis process, and I was able to get complete DNA results from all of those standards to represent individuals, and then comparisons were made to question samples in this case.
Okay, now, talking about the results, what are possible results as a result of your testing? Is there things that, for instance, explain to the jury what does inconclusive mean to you?
So inconclusive, so when I'm doing a comparison to a DNA profile from a questioned item of evidence, in which I have results that are comparable or interpretable, I then do a comparison to a standard, and sometimes when that comparison is done, the result is it's inconclusive. And this essentially means that I cannot say for certain if that individual is included or excluded as a possible contributor to the mixed DNA profile. So when I'm doing comparisons, I do something that's called a likelihood ratio, which is essentially comparing one event under 2 separate situations. So it's usually the DNA results given if a person contributed their DNA versus another person in the population with those DNA types. So when I'm doing that comparison, if it falls in that inconclusive zone, it'll be a range in which during my validation, it showed that there were some false inclusions and false exclusions when compared to standards. So in that range, I truly cannot say if that person is included as a possible contributor or excluded as a possible contributor.
Okay. Based on your training, experience, your expertise in the area, would there be instances where there is no DNA, there is not sufficient DNA for you to come to a determination?
Yes, sometimes with items of evidence, as I said, the DNA might just be too limited so I can't do any comparisons to it, or other times, even with a mixed DNA profile, there might be information for a contributor or one of the individuals that makes up that mixed DNA profile that is higher and easily comparable to, and then sometimes there might be a second or third donor that's a little bit more limited in nature and has less DNA types present. And a lot of times that's where the inconclusive comparison will be seen.
For instance, is there necessary automatic DNA on this pen because I'm holding it in my hand?
Not all the time. So DNA, it depends on a lot of different factors that can contribute to DNA being left behind. So it depends on the individual. Some individuals shed their DNA more easily than other individuals. And then on the item, it depends on length of contact. So the longer one holds onto an item, the more likely I'm expecting to see DNA present. If someone touches an item very briefly, it's less likely to see that DNA present. Also, depending on the item, the DNA that's possibly already on that item, as well as the item itself. If it's a smooth item, less DNA usually gets left behind versus a rough item, because rough surfaces will kind of slough off more DNA. So it really depends on many factors.
Okay. If a person had gloves on, would that affect the DNA analysis?
Yes, that can affect leaving DNA behind.
And it would mean it would be less likely that DNA would be left or present on a particular item of evidence that you were asked to examine, correct?
Yes, that's possible.
Judge, may I have a moment?
Yes.
Ms. Ozlowski, I think you said Mr. Tucker was one of the standards that you received in this case, correct?
Correct.
And there were inconclusive items that you could not include him in with respect to certain pieces of evidence. Is that fair to say?
Some of the items that I did do comparisons to his standard were inconclusive, and I could not say whether he was included or excluded as a possible contributor to those items.
Nothing further from this witness, Your Honor. Thank you.
Okay. Cross-examination?
Agent Oslowski, I don't know.
Just crime laboratory analyst Oslowski.
Okay, got it.
Or analyst Oslowski is fine.
Did you get the subpoena that I tried to send?
I don't think so.
Okay, just check. Maybe I had the wrong email, whatever. Okay, so we just heard the prosecutor go over the explanation for inconclusive results. Now, did you get some conclusive results in this case?
So there was some DNA evidence that I compared the buccal swabs, and he was excluded as a possible contributor to those DNA profiles.
Okay, and would that DNA profile include the knife that was tested in this case?
Is it okay if I refer to the notes for
Yeah,
all those
please.
samples? So I did take a sample from the blunt end of the handle of the knife, and for that, Franklin Tucker was excluded as a possible was inconclusive. So he failed to demonstrate sufficient statistical support for inclusion or exclusion to that item. For the handle of the knife that I took a sample from, Franklin Tucker was excluded as a contributor to that mixed DNA profile. Let's see. I believe those were the main samples that I took from the item, other than I did take 2 areas from the blade in which I got a complete DNA profile, but that DNA profile had matched the DNA profile from Matthew Bonnett.
And was that a mixed DNA profile as well? Was there somebody else on that blade?
So on area C and D of the blade that I had taken, that was a complete profile. So that was indicative of a single source profile. For the handle of the knife, that demonstrated the presence of a mixture consistent with 3 donors.
Okay, and who were those 3 donors?
So I did comparisons to standards that were submitted in the case. Rory Wilson was included as a possible contributor to the mixed DNA profile, and then I did the likelihood ratio that I mentioned, which is a statistic to give weight to that comparison. And the observed mixed DNA profile is 12,000 times more likely to occur if the sample originated from Rory Wilson and 2 unrelated individuals than from 3 unrelated individuals. I then did a comparison to Matthew Bonnett. He was included as a possible contributor to the mixed DNA profile. The observed mixed DNA profile is 9.9 million times more likely to occur if the sample originated from Matthew Bonnett and 2 unrelated individuals than from 3 unrelated individuals. I did the comparison as well to Paula Belmonte, and she was included as a possible contributor to the mixed DNA profile. And the observed mixed DNA profile is greater than 700 billion times more likely to occur if the sample originated from Paula Belmonte and 2 unrelated individuals than from 3 unrelated individuals. And then I also did comparison to John Johnson, and he was excluded as a contributor to the mixed DNA profile.
Okay, and Ms. Oslowski, just in layman's terms, because I love the science behind it, but I'm a little bit more of a layman. Would that mean that it's highly likely that Rory Wilson at some time handled that knife and that it came into contact with both Matthew Bonnett and Miss Paula Belmont?
So since I'm never present, I can never fully say how DNA got on an item, when it got there, or under what circumstances. I can only do the comparison and say if the DNA types could be included as a possible contributor to the mixed sample, and then do a likelihood ratio to that comparison.
Okay, but again, those are the 3 main contributors I would from what I'm gathering from your report.
Those 3 individuals were included as possible contributors, and then I did the likelihood ratio to get the statistic for it.
Okay, and what about the mask that you tested, the mask that was used?
So for the mask, let me take a look. So I took several areas, several samples from the mask. So an area A of the mask that I called, which was a area that gave chemical indications for the presence of blood. And this was on the exterior bottom right jaw area. The DNA results was a complete DNA profile consistent with a female individual. And that DNA profile matched the DNA profile from Paula Belmonte. And I did a statistic, or the likelihood ratio, to that comparison, and the observed DNA profile was greater than 700 billion times more likely to occur if the sample originated from Paula Belmonte than from an unrelated individual. And there was other limited data that was not interpretable that was observed in that sample, but was too limited to do any comparisons to. So that was one area. Then there was another area that gave chemical indications for the presence of blood. I named this area B, and it was on the exterior right side of the forehead. The DNA results obtained from that area demonstrated the presence of a mixture consistent with 2 donors, including at least 1 male contributor. And then I did comparisons to all the standards that were submitted. Paula Belmonte was included as a possible contributor. I did the likelihood ratio. The observed mixed DNA profile is greater than 700 billion times more likely to occur. The sample originated from Paula Belmonte and 1 unrelated individual than from 2 unrelated individuals. And then comparison of the profile from Franklin Tucker to the mixture obtained failed to demonstrate sufficient statistical support for inclusion or inclusion, so therefore it was in that inconclusive zone, so there's no determination can be made regarding the contribution of Franklin Tucker. And then Rory Wilson, John Johnson, and Matthew Bonnett were excluded as contributors to that mixed DNA profile. I then had an area that I called Area C, and this was also an area that gave chemical indications for the presence of blood. And this was the exterior left bottom jaw. The DNA results obtained demonstrated the presence of a mixture consistent with 2 donors, including at least 1 male contributor. Matthew Bonnett was included as a possible contributor to the mixed DNA profile. The observed mixed DNA profile is greater than 700 billion times more likely to occur if the sample originated from Matthew Bonnett and 1 unrelated individual than from 2 unrelated individuals. And then Paula Belmonte was included as a possible contributor to that mixed DNA profile. The observed mixed DNA profile was greater than 700 billion times more likely to occur if the sample originated from Paul Belmonte and one unrelated individual than from two unrelated individuals. I then compared to Franklin Tucker, Rory Wilson, and John Johnson, and they were excluded as possible contributors to that mixed DNA profile. I then took a sample from the whole interior of the mask, and that demonstrated the presence of a mixture consistent with two donors, including at least one male contributor. And I did comparisons to the standards that were submitted, and Rory Wilson was included as a possible contributor to the mixed DNA profile. The observed mixed DNA profile is greater than 700 billion times more likely to occur if the sample originated from Rory Wilson than from one unrelated individual than from two unrelated individuals. Comparison of the profile from Paula Belmonte to the mixture obtained failed to demonstrate the sufficient statistical support those in that inconclusive range, and therefore no determination could be made regarding the contribution of Paula Belmonte to that item or to that area. And then Franklin Tucker, John Johnson, and Matthew Bonnett were excluded as contributors to that mixed DNA profile.
Ms. Oslowski, again, just if I put it wrong, please correct me. Now, Area A, C, B, the jury's not quite, I'm sure, we're not looking at the same map right here. Would it be proper to say that Rory Wilson's DNA was the high contributor on the inside of the mask?
So for the inside of the mask, he was included as a possible contributor, and then I was able to do a likelihood ratio to that. And then otherwise, Franklin Tucker, John Johnson, and Matthew Bonnett were excluded as contributors, and Paula Belmonte was failed to demonstrate the sufficient statistical support for inclusion or exclusion.
What was the likelihood of Rory Wilson?
So the observed mixed DNA profile was greater than 700 billion times more likely to occur if the sample originated from Rory Wilson and one unrelated individual than from two unrelated individuals.
Okay. And then the rest of the ones the rest of the samples that you had were from the outside of the mask, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, so that would have been a contributing of Paula Belmont and Matthew Bonnett, correct? They were conclusive.
So these were areas that were reddish brown in color and gave chemical indication for the presence of blood. And then for area A, it was a complete female, consistent with a complete female individual, and it matched the DNA profile of Paula Belmonte. And then I did the statistic, the likelihood ratio. And then the area B was a mixture consistent with two donors, and Paula Belmonte was included as a possible contributor. And then for area 8C, which was a mixture of two donors, Matthew Bonnett was included as a possible contributor, and Paula Belmonte was included as a possible contributor.
Okay, thank you. Now, as far as the inconclusive results, there's a lot of things that can cause inconclusive results, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, and, again, I've heard of secondary DNA transfer. Can you please explain what that might be?
So secondary DNA transfer is something that would occur. So say that I touch this glass of water, and then the bailiff touched the glass of water, and then we swabbed his hands, and my DNA was on his hands. So we didn't have any direct contact, so it was secondary transfer.
Okay, but that's where that likelihood ratio comes in, is that correct? Where it's more direct, or there's more than enough DNA for the sample?
So honestly, with my DNA results, I can never say how the DNA results got there. I can't say if it got there from primary, secondary transfer. I can only testify to the DNA results that I obtained and then do a comparison.
Would it be more likely if there was more of a sample, say if you had a larger sample as opposed to a smaller one?
It really depends on the sample. And depending on the item. So sometimes it might be a really large item, but there just might not be DNA present. So sometimes DNA just isn't present on an item. Other times there could be DNA results, but it could just be too limited. Or there might be DNA results. If there's a biological fluid, sometimes that DNA result will be more prevalent than other DNA that's present.
Now, the prosecutor also mentioned gloves, how that might affect the DNA results. Now, would gloves totally block the DNA, or would it be the DNA that's on the outside of the gloves that you might pick up? in your opinion?
So wearing gloves, I would expect DNA to not go through the gloves. I wear gloves at my job when I'm doing DNA analysis to try and prevent my DNA getting on an item. But obviously it's difficult to say what DNA might be on the outside of the gloves depending on if an individual touched other things and then touched something else. So it would be difficult to really say.
Right, that would be that secondary, secondary DNA transfer would be outside of the gloves, right?
Depending on what they touch or if they touch the outside of the gloves themselves.
Okay. Okay, so again, we go back to those inconclusive results. They can happen for a lot of reasons. And could you explain some of the reasons that might actually happen?
I'm sorry, one more time, did you say?
The inconclusive results, why that might happen.
So with the results where I cannot say definitively if they're included or excluded, so obviously it's possible that the DNA just, when doing a comparison to an individual, their DNA might just not be present. And obviously that can be an option, as well as sometimes, as I was saying, there can be DNA that's present, but it could be too limited or not enough to be able to see the DNA types there. And sometimes there can be another high profile that could be overwhelming the sample, preventing other DNA from being present. So those are kind of the three main things that can affect seeing DNA present.
Okay. Again, like if a mixture like that, it becomes hard, and I get it. Let's see, hold on. Was there any DNA from Ms. Bellamont on any other objects besides the mask and the knife that you tested?
Just to look through. So I did have some clothing that was submitted. There was a dark blue long sleeve shirt. And I tested some areas and took some samples forward for DNA analysis. So there was the inside left wrist that I took a sample from, and that demonstrated the presence of a mixture that was consistent with 2 donors, including at least 1 male contributor. And Paula Belmonte was included as a possible contributor to that mixed DNA profile. The observed mixed DNA profile was greater than 700 billion times more likely to occur if the sample originated from Paula Belmonte and 1 unrelated individual than from 2 unrelated individuals. I also obtained partial DNA profiles consistent with a female individual from the inside back left forearm as well as the inside front left forearm. And those DNA profiles matched the DNA profile of Paula Belmonte. And the observed DNA profiles were greater than 700 billion times more likely to occur if the samples originated from Paula Belmonte than from an unrelated individual. And then I also had a shirt, another shirt that was from a Roger Roggett. And I had a sample from, let me see. So with items that are collected directly from an individual, I can expect to see their DNA types present. So this item was said to come directly from Roger Roggett. So I was expecting to see his types, and there were 2 areas, the back middle right and back lower right, and he was expected to be a donor to that item. And then a complete foreign DNA profile consistent with a female donor was obtained from items 17D and 17E, which was the back middle right and back lower right. And that foreign DNA profile matched the DNA profile from Paula Belmonte. And then I did the statistic, and the observed foreign DNA profile is greater than 700 billion times more likely to occur if the samples originated from Paula Belmonte than from an unrelated individual.
Okay, and Ms. Ostrowski, I'm just going to ask you a few more questions just to make sure here. Now, was my DNA, Franklin Tyrone Tucker, just to be clear, was my DNA included in anything in this case? Was it actually, included as nothing inconclusive?
So for the DNA results that I obtained, he was not, there was no samples that he was included as a possible contributor.
Okay, thank you. One other thing, the reason I asked about secondary DNA transfer, how often does that happen airborne? Does it normally have to be something you touch or something you come into contact with?
I'm sorry, can you ask the question one more time?
Can you have airborne DNA transfer, or is it, secondary DNA transfer or anything like that?
It's difficult to say. I mean, if someone spits kind of on an item, then that can contribute to DNA being left behind.
I would imagine that could happen. Okay, so if you have something like the knife, right, and you have both victims' DNA on the blade or on that knife, right? Now, could it be concluded that it's highly likely it was used or came into contact with both people?
So once again, my likelihood ratio or my DNA testing doesn't determine that. I can't determine how that DNA got there. I can tell you that the samples that I took from the blade gave chemical indications for the presence of blood, and then tell you the results I got, and then the comparison to the standards that I obtained.
No, but would it be highly unlikely that the DNA from one individual could go across the room to another?
Mr. Tucker's testifying on it.
I'm asking a question.
Well, yeah, but it seems like, but go ahead, finish the question.
Anyway, would it be highly unlikely that the DNA from one item could jump across the room and get on the wall?
That's cause of speculation.
She's an expert.
Well, experts don't get to speculate, but if you are able to answer it, you may.
DNA cannot just move from one item to another.
That's what I was
Across
asking.
the room.
Thank you, Ms. Oskowski.
Okay.
That's exactly what I was asking. Maybe I didn't ask it correctly, but thank you for your time, and thank you for coming out today. I'm done with my question.
Is there any redirect?
Absolutely. Good afternoon again.
Good afternoon.
Start off with, you indicated or you testified and mentioned the name John Johnson.
Yes.
Was he excluded from DNA on the knife, based on your report, if it refresh your recollection?
Double check. So from the blunt end of the handle was the comparison of John Johnson to the mixture obtained failed to demonstrate the sufficient statistical support for inclusion or exclusion for the blunt end of the handle, and then John Johnson was excluded to the DNA results from the handle of the knife, and then the two areas on the blade, as I mentioned, that that match the DNA profile of Matthew Bonnett.
Okay. Just to recap for the jury, would you please recap for them the items of evidence that the defendant in this case could not be excluded from? They came up inconclusive.
So for the blunt end of the handle of the knife, the comparison of the profile from Franklin Tucker to the mixture obtained failed to demonstrate the sufficient statistical support for inclusion or exclusion, so I cannot make any determination to that item or that part of the handle of the knife. Were you asking just about the knife or just all items?
No, and the other items that were inconclusive with respect to this defendant.
Okay, so then area B of the mask that gave chemical indications for the presence of blood, which was the exterior right side of the forehead. The comparison of the profile from Franklin Tucker to that item failed to demonstrate the sufficient statistical support for inclusion or exclusion. And then there was the interior of the mask. Oh, no, excuse me. Let me see. Nope, not that one. He was excluded to the interior of the mask. To the inside left wrist of the first shirt, the dark blue long sleeve shirt that I mentioned. Comparison of the profile from Franklin Tucker to the mixture obtained from item 11C, which is what I call it, the inside left wrist. It failed to demonstrate sufficient statistical support for inclusion or exclusion to that item. And then I also took a sample from the inside right arm, right wrist, left upper arm, lower back, and lower front of that shirt. And comparison of the profile from Franklin Tucker to that mixture obtained, because it actually demonstrated the presence of a mixture with 3 donors. It failed to demonstrate sufficient statistical support for inclusion or exclusion, so no determination could be made regarding the contribution of Franklin Tucker to that item. There was also a pair of black gloves, and from the right hand outside top wrist, I took a sample, and that demonstrated the presence of a mixture consistent with 2 donors, including at least 1 male contributor. And the comparison of the profile from Franklin Tucker to the mixture obtained failed to demonstrate sufficient statistical support for inclusion or exclusion, so no determination could be made regarding that item. Then from the left hand inside of a glove, comparison of the profile, well, that first demonstrated the presence of a mixture consistent with 3 donors, including at least 1 male contributor. And the comparison of the profile from Franklin Tucker to that mixture obtained failed to demonstrate sufficient statistical support for inclusion or exclusion. So no determination can be made regarding the contribution of Franklin Tucker to that item. And I believe that concludes the inconclusive comparisons.
So it's safe to say that there was numerous items of evidence that you didn't have a sufficient DNA sample to compare with Mr. Tucker in this case.
So those are the items that I did get DNA results, but the comparison showed that it was in an inconclusive range. So therefore, no determination can be made regarding if he's included or excluded as a possible contributor to those DNA results.
Okay, and just to make sure you only received 1 mask to analyze in this case, correct?
Correct.
No scarves, no gator scarves or anything like that were ever submitted to the lab, correct?
Correct.
Okay. You testified with respect to, I guess, the level of DNA on the knife with respect to Mr. Wilson. What was that level?
Do you mean the amount of DNA that was actually present?
Yes.
Okay, so. Find the sample first. Or do you mean the statistic? I don't know if
The
I got.
statistic, I'm sorry.
Okay, I was gonna say, I don't think I
apologize.
got into the amount of DNA. So from the handle of the knife.
Yes, ma'am.
So that demonstrated the presence of a mixture consistent with 3 donors, and he was, Rory Wilson was included as a possible contributor. And the observed mixed DNA profile was 12,000 times more likely to occur if the sample originated from Rory Wilson and 2 unrelated individuals than if from 3 unrelated individuals.
Okay. Now, Ms. Oslowski, if the defendant in this case is alleged to have been wearing gloves at the time of the murder and the robbery in this case, the likelihood that you would get an inconclusive result is a possibility, correct?
It could be possible. I do know gloves, as I said, can prevent sometimes DNA being left behind. But as I said, I can never fully say how DNA got there, when DNA got there. I can only just testify to the results that I obtained.
Thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
May I recross to ask a couple of questions?
Well, you'll have to approach the bench here to tell me what the questions would be. If the state would like to join us. Cross.
Soslowski. Sorry to keep you up. I just need, I just wanted to ask two quick questions. Do you know how long it was from the time, from the time that the crime, occurred to when you got the first samples of DNA? The date.
So the offense date was listed as November 17th, 2017. And then I began working some of the items in this case August 14th, 2018.
So we're talking.
And then, let's see, so my report for the first submission of items was released in December 7th, 2018. I don't know if that's easier, maybe.
It's approximately a year. Is that it?
Approximately, yes. And that was all the standards, and the knife, and the mask. And then I had an additional submission of items, and that include the dark blue long sleeve shirt and the gloves that I had mentioned. And that was submitted September 18th of 2019, and then my report was released on March 31st, 2020. I then got another submission of items. The items were submitted on March 18th, 2020 and April 30th, 2020. And my report was June 25th of 2020, and that was the shirt from Roger Roget, and the buckle swab was represented as being from Roger Roget as well.
Okay. And just one more time, one more question here is, okay, inconclusive means exactly that, right? Can't be excluded, included, it means exactly that, right?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Oh, and please enjoy your afternoon.
Thank you.
Is there any
No further questions for the witness, Your Honor. She's excused.
Okay.
So my release from my...
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
All right, members of the jury, we're getting near the end of our day here, but I do need to ask you to go in the jury room for a few minutes. I'd like to discuss a few things with the attorneys, and that way I can give you some very clear direction for the future. So please go in the jury room for a few. Thank you. Jurors are gone, so what's on the state's agenda?
Judge, I think we're ready to rest.
You think you're ready to rest, or you're officially resting, or you need a little time to...
We are officially resting.
Okay. Right, so then what does the defense want to do at this particular time?
Well, Your Honor, we'll go ahead and, let's see, tomorrow's Friday. I'm going to go ahead and see if I can get Ms. Paul Belmont, assuming, we are going to file a motion for acquittal, but, assuming that doesn't get it.
Well, file a motion, I mean, that...
I assume it doesn't get approved, but, if it doesn't.
Well, I mean, that would be something that I would be dealing with first thing in the morning. It's...
But could we do it in the afternoon?
No, that's not, no, that's not, No, I mean, I can go into a
I'm not
lengthy
sure,
explanation.
I'm just not sure, I'm not sure of the process, Your Honor. I'm sorry.
Well, ordinarily, it is a motion that's made verbally without any kind of written motion. It's ordinarily something that is anticipated, and it's ordinarily a function of, familiarity with the case, and so it's not, so it wouldn't be something that I would say we're gonna put the jury off for the afternoon when it's something we can deal with in the morning, and I don't see any unfairness to expect if you're gonna make such a motion. Again, it doesn't have to be in writing. You can certainly gather your thoughts and have plenty of time between now and then to do it, so.
That would be fine, Your Honor. The only thing is, at that point, we'll go ahead and, I plan on calling Ms. Belmont.
Okay, so has all the groundwork been laid for that? Because I assume it's going to be by the Zoom, and I assume that the setup in the, I assume she's still in the hospital. I don't know that.
She is still in the hospital,
So, and whatever equipment she needs on that end, and whatever address that she needs to hook up here, and whatever additional preparation you've made through our technical team. As always, the devil's in the detail.
Your Honor, the only detail that I don't have control over is the state. They wanted one of their investigators to be present. Ms. Belmont did actually have a request from the state, if they would want to hear it, that she's worked with a few of the investigators at the state attorney's office before. She was comfortable with, I think it was Frank
Zamora?
Frank Zamora and
he's-
Tom Walker. She's comfortable with either one of them. I would ask the state maybe take that into consideration.
So,
So we'll have one of them, we'll have one of our investigators at the hospital tomorrow morning, Judge. Is she at Lower Keys Medical?
She's Lower Keys Medical.
can we see if Carrie's still here? I don't know that he is or he isn't, but
And did Your Honor get the letter from her physician?
no, I didn't. But I'm not questioning that that the Zoom is all right.
No, it's okay. I was curious because I know she said it was sent in.
Okay, I haven't received, my judicial assistant has not provided any kind of email or fax or otherwise U.S. mail.
I know last time it ended up with the state attorney's office. I'll have to see if that's where it got sent.
But that's not going to be a hang-up for me at this point.
I wasn't able to get in touch with him in his office, Judge.
Okay. So, I'm just concerned that logistically, I don't know.
None of us have been provided with a Zoom link yet. I don't know if that's going to be done tonight. I assume that Your Honor will get a Zoom link and we'll sign in the courtroom, I guess, and have her. We'll be here with the defendant asking questions. She'll be appearing on Zoom. We'll have our investigator over there. It's not my witness. That's all. That's what I'm expecting. I haven't seen a Zoom link yet. So.
Well, and Your Honor, again, we weren't sure if we were going to end today or end tomorrow. We weren't sure about that. So that, again, it was based on when the prosecution was ended in its case. The only thing I would ask is that for the number or the email of the tech here in the court so that I can arrange it with them.
Let me ask you this. How long would you anticipate her testimony to be?
I actually don't anticipate it to be that long, Your Honor. Again, I don't know what they're going to do on cross, but I mean, her story is fairly simple.
Can you remind me, she testified during the Wilson trial. In what form was that?
That was the perpetuated deposition testimony, and it was a video, I don't know, pretty long video actually, and then the cross-examination obviously was on the video and the redirect, so that was all done through that
It was also for 3 attorneys on the tape, so you guys probably narrowed it down to just the stuff you needed for that trial, correct?
Okay, I understand we can't predict the future. What I'm trying to do is, the best I can, understand what to reasonably expect tomorrow, because what if Ms. Belmonte is 2 hours? Are there other witnesses and things you have standing by, or?
I do have other witnesses, Your Honor. I've been trying to get in contact with them to tell them, because I actually originally had them slated to run earlier. We've gone a little bit longer, so I've been trying to get in contact with them to make sure that they know that they're supposed to be on deck.
Okay, so I think if we try to put Ms. Belmonte on tomorrow morning, we could run into problems. I don't know, if our tech fellow, I would think he'd be available, if not, certainly one of our other members, but is everything gonna go smoothly? Or is it better to, as much as I hate to say this, deal with the JOA motion, deal with the technical stuff regarding any issues about the Zoom, and have the jurors come at 1 o'clock, so presumably at that point in time, everything's in place for that presentation?
Judge, I think that's probably, I'm with you, it's unappealing, but I see what Your Honor's thinking. We're gonna have the jury sitting waiting for us in the morning while we work all this out.
Yeah.
And I would rather not have that.
Yeah, I'm just, again, trying to be cautious and considerate of those folks. So we come in and I find out our main guy isn't here, we get someone else. Well, what kind of Zoom address? How's that equipment working? Have we tested it?
I would agree, Your Honor.
It's just better to have that cushion.
Understood, Judge. Just so Your Honor's aware, Judge, as far as the Zoom link, because I have the Zoom application on my phone. If Mr. Tucker or his representatives have that link or that application, they simply send the state an invitation. We can log on here via the court's internet system and join that meeting, but there are certain steps that need to be taken on Mr. Tucker's part at the hospital to get that in the way.
Well, I like your knowledge and your, your level of understanding. It just, in my experience, things go wrong. Stuff happens. So,
Technology.
what I say is, I'm going to tell the jurors, come back at 1 o'clock. I'm going to tell us to be here at 9. I'm going to hear Mr. Tucker's motion for judgment acquittal. I'm going to then see if we can, whatever logistics, whatever coordination needs to be done to be sure that the testimony of Ms. Belmonte is as smooth as possible in terms of the presentation, the communication, and then if you can have someone else available after her, fine. Other than that, I guess you'll have the weekend to line up whatever else you anticipate, but we can deal with that tomorrow. So that's the plan. Anybody have any questions?
No, Your Honor.
No, Your Honor, thank you.
Oh, that's a good question. Are you going to rest in front of the jury?
We will go ahead and do that right now, sir.
All right. Very good.
All jurors present in the courtroom, Your Honor.
Thank you. Welcome back. Please be seated, everyone. All right, welcome back. Mr. Mansfield, on behalf of the state of Florida.
Yes, Judge, at this time, the state of Florida rests its case. We presented everything we intend to present.
All right, members of the jury, the state has now rested its case in chief. So, that's a point in the trial where the judge has to conduct some proceedings outside of your presence. Again, this is normal. That's the way trials go. You can see what time it is, so it seems to me that it's a good time to excuse you until 1 p.m. tomorrow. We'll take care of what we need to take care of, which is not short. And when you come here tomorrow, the defendant will have an opportunity to present evidence in his case. Once again, I want to reassure you that we're on schedule. We're big picture, we're on schedule, and so we all thank you for your flexibility, your attention, your patience, your understanding, and your participation as jurors in this case. Remember, follow the cautionary instructions. See you tomorrow at 1. Thank you. One more thing, Mr. Tucker.
Yes, sir.
I really don't want to go through the empty share tomorrow
made yourself
morning.
clear.
Would you like to start at 9:15 tomorrow so you can factor in the traffic and all the other?
Well, Your Honor, whenever Your Honor is...
Well, I understand that. Like I said, I really don't want to have to
I will do
deal
everything.
with that issue or unpleasantries. So if I give you an extra 15 minutes, that ought to assure your punctuality.
Yes, sir. And like I said, I apologize. It's just,
I know, I
but
understand.
I will actually do every effort to make sure I am here early, Your Honor.
Okay, so we'll say 9:15, and then whatever in terms of setting up this Zoom testimony, let's kind of anticipate it. And we'll hear the motion for judgment of acquittal, and we'll go from there. So have a good evening.
Thank you, Your Honor.
9:15.